podcast by George. It's your chance to cut through the clutter and grab a few minutes of news, blues, and interviews that will leave you thinking, by George, I think he's got it. Now here's your host, George A. Clark.
On the nomination of
Mr.
Judge
Chairman.
Brett Kavanaugh
Mr. Chairman.
to serve as Associate Justice.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be
Supreme Court
recognized
of the
for a
United
question
States.
before we proceed.
Regular order, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be recognized to ask a question before we proceed. The committee received just last night, less than 15 hours ago,
Mr. Chairman, regular order.
42,000 pages of documents that we have not had an opportunity to review or read or analyze.
You're out of order. I'll proceed.
We cannot possibly move forward, Mr. Chairman,
I
with this
extend a
hearing.
very warm
We
welcome
have not
to
been
Judge
given an
Kavanaugh,
opportunity to have a meaningful
his wife,
hearing on
Ashley.
this nominee.
their two daughters.
Mr. Chairman,
Their
I
extended
agree with
family
my
and
colleague,
friends.
Senator Harris. Mr. Chairman,
Judge
we
Kavanaugh's
received
many law
42,000
clerks
documents that we haven't
and
been able
everyone else
to
joining us
review last
today.
night, and we believe this hearing
I
should be
know this is an
postponed.
exciting day for all of you here,
Mr. Chairman,
and you're rightly proud
Mr. Chairman,
of
if
Judge.
we cannot be recognized, I move to adjourn.
The American people.
Chairman, I move
get
to adjourn.
Hear directly from Judge Kavanaugh later this afternoon.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adjourn.
Wow. Well, as you probably know by now, they did not adjourn. Hello, hi, how are you? This is George A. Clark, back with another podcast by George. Dateline, Washington, D.C. The confirmation hearings for President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, got off to a chaotic start on Capitol Hill Tuesday, with Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee demanding Republican Chairman Chuck Grassley of Iowa adjourn the hearing as more than a dozen protesters in the gallery called for it to end. This from Yahoo News. Grassley's opening statement was immediately interrupted by Senator Kamala Harris, a Democrat from California. You heard her early in that recording. And then a little bit later, she was joined by Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota, again trying to call a point of order. She was overruled by Grassley. And then a short while later, I thought it was very interesting after the move to adjourn by Senator Richard Blumenthal, the Democrat from Connecticut. Grassley himself was taken to task a little bit by Senator Cory Booker, who appealed to what he called Grassley's decency and integrity while calling for transparency from the committee. According to figures released by Democrats ahead of Tuesday's hearing, more than 90% of Kavanaugh's records from his time as White House counsel and staff secretary have not been provided to the Senate. What is the rush, Booker asked. What are we hiding by not letting those documents come out? We're rushing through this process. And to that, Grassley had this reply.
I'd like to
Regular
respond.
order.
I'd like to respond to Senator Booker. Senator Booker, I think that I respect very much a lot of things you do, but you spoke about my decency and you spoke about my decency and integrity, and I think you are taking advantage of my decency and integrity.
Reuters goes on to report that more than 7 hours went by during the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing before Kavanaugh, the conservative federal appeals court judge Trump selected for a lifetime job on the top U.S. judicial body, got to deliver his opening statement. Kavanaugh, nominated by a president who has often criticized the federal judiciary, told the senators that a judge must be independent, not swayed by public pressure. Our independent judiciary is the crown jewel of our constitutional republic. With Democratic senators repeatedly interrupting the committee's Republican chairman Chuck Grassley at the onset of the hearing, the session quickly became a ruckus. U.S. Capitol Police say 61 protesters were removed from the room and charged with disorderly conduct, along with 9 more outside the hearing. Democrats decried the withholding of the documents and sought to have the proceedings adjourned as Grassley struggled to maintain order. This is the first confirmation for a Supreme Court justice I've seen, basically, according to mob rule, according to Republican Senator John Cornyn, a characterization Democrats rejected. What we've heard is the noise of democracy, Democratic Senator Dick Durbin said. Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, they're very close in the Senate chamber to taking on the look of a third world nation and hitting each other over the head with their shoes. Maybe punching each other in the nose. This thing looks to me like it's all about ready to fall apart. Maybe they'll pull it back together. I will say this, I'm glad to see those folks getting a pound of flesh from Chuck Grassley, because he thought he was pretty smart using Senate rules to prevent Barack Obama from getting his Supreme Court nominee. Chuck Grassley played a huge role in that, and now he's getting a little bit of his comeuppance today. You know, this whole thing is quickly taking on the appearance of a banana republic, and it reminds me of Bob Schieffer, the longtime CBS news anchor and correspondent who hosted Face the Nation. I remember during the presidential debates this last go-around with Hillary Clinton, and Bob Schieffer brought up the point that it was beginning to look like a banana republic when Donald Trump lined up all those former Bill Clinton accusers. Remember that? I'll never forget Bob Schieffer, the look on his face. I mean, he's getting to be a senior observer, to say the least. He said, my God, what are we becoming here? A banana republic? And that's pretty much what this looks like. Either that or some kind of, Judge Judy reality show. It's kind of embarrassing. I suppose the process will work itself out and everything will take on a more civil discourse, but the Democrats are probably going to lose this one. It looks that way to me. I mean, it's good to get a pound of flesh from Chuck Grassley, though, because as you'll recall, he played a major role in stonewalling, preventing Barack Obama from getting his Supreme Court nominee through. I don't feel sorry for Chuck Grassley at all. As a matter of fact, I take a little bit of delight in watching him having to struggle through this, and he is struggling mightily. He is looking a little bit infirm, to say the least. Okay, well, that's one big story on Capitol Hill today. Now, the other big story today, and one that I personally took a little satisfaction and a couple of chuckles from, I got to admit, is this is reported in USA Today. White House Chief of Staff John Kelly frequently lost his temper and referred to President Donald Trump as unhinged and an idiot. Author Bob Woodward writes in his new book, Fear Trump in the White House. Kelly, in a statement Tuesday, denied the claims as simply not true. White House Secretary Sarah Sanders also refuted the book's claims. The book also describes a president obsessed, angry, and paranoid about the Russia investigation of Special Counsel Robert Mueller. The Washington Post said it obtained a copy of the 448-page book before its release. Woodward, an associate editor at the Post, rose to stardom with his coverage of the Watergate break-in that brought down President Richard Nixon. Woodward cites as his sources hundreds of hours of interviews with mostly unnamed Trump aides and others. According to the book, Kelly often vented his frustration with Trump. He's an idiot, Kelly is quoted as saying. It's pointless to try to convince him of anything. He's gone off the rails. We're in crazy town. I don't even know why any of us are here. This is the worst job I've ever had. The Post reports that a recurring theme of the book is the efforts of Trump aides to control his impulses, hiding papers so Trump can't sign them, and taking the president down from what were viewed as bad ideas. The Post reports that Trump's then personal attorney, John Dowd, felt he had to convince Trump that he would commit perjury if he talked to Mueller. So Dowd staged a practice grilling that provided a string of contradictions and lies. This thing's a hoax, Trump finally said before deciding he didn't want to testify. After all, I mean, honest to God, it reminds me of a Simpsons episode when they put Homer Simpson in the witness protection program, and he just cannot seem to understand that he's got another persona that he needs to adopt and another name, and he keeps messing up. Anyway, it's pretty funny. But this new book by Bob Woodward ought to be a blockbuster, and I suggest that you catch it. Oddly enough, I think it's scheduled to come out on September 11th, but look for it then. It's Bob Woodward, and it's entitled Fear Trump in the White House. Okay, let's get away from all of this for a couple of minutes and enjoy some great music from a friend of mine, Dan Medeiros. Dan's from Canada. I don't know what he makes of all of this craziness down here in America, but he moved here a few years ago, He's a great hockey player, and he's a great musician. I tell him all the time, I don't know if he's a better musician or a better hockey player. We'll talk about both in an upcoming episode. We're going to have an interview with Dan and a little bit more of his music, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of what's ahead. He plays a great 12-string guitar. He has a full band called the DM Project, but this is Dan solo with his 12-string, and this song is called Missing You.
Time passes over everything, waiting for the moment that you sing. Be okay, I'm running back to you. Lonely, think of all the things we're
A big part of this show is going to be to introduce you to friends of mine that have a lot of talent, and Dan Medeiros is just one of them. I mean, that guy's a hockey player. That's the way I think of him anyway, and listen to that heartfelt music. I mean, that's great stuff, and we're going to have him on an upcoming episode with more of his music and a little bit more of an in-depth interview to get his perspective on things, and it'll be interesting to say the least. That's coming up, but I wanted to play still some of that song for you anyway. That's called Missing You. All right, we're just about out of time for today. I want to give us our national travel forecast here for folks that are hitting the road or moving about around the country. And I always encourage people not to think short-term weather, but think long-term climate. Here's your forecast. Tropical trouble and a slow-moving weather maker will make rain a theme for much of the U.S. on Wednesday. Tropical storm Gordon will make its way into the central Gulf of Mexico Wednesday. Along with it, it'll bring heavy rain and gusty winds from the lower Mississippi Valley through the southeast. Highs will stay hot and humid as Gordon passes through, reaching the 80s and low 90s. Across the nation's midsection from the upper Mississippi Valley, upper Great Lakes, and Ohio Valley through the southern plains, a hefty cold front will initiate more showers and thunderstorms to mark midweek. Highs will only reach into the 70s for most, while the southern plains continue to stay toasty in the 80s and low 90s. The Tennessee Valley will be included in the soggy weather with highs in the muggy 80s and 90s. The southwest and the central Great Basin will have scattered showers and thunderstorms around again on Wednesday. Highs will stay quite warm in the 80s and 90s, with triple digits spreading throughout Southern California and the desert southwest. Hello to everybody listening in down in Palm Springs. Much of the western U.S. and northern plains, as well as the mid-Atlantic and northeast, will have a mostly quiet Wednesday. The higher elevations of Pennsylvania and interior northeast will have a few raindrops interrupting the day, but everywhere else will stay dry. The west will have the mercury reaching the 80s and 90s, while the east feels the same with plenty of humidity. The northern plains can expect much cooler weather, with highs only reaching the autumn-like 60s. Well, that's it for this show. It's time to get on out of here and say bygone, see you later, be careful, look out, duck, don't hurt yourself, and we'll do this all over again on another podcast by George. All the best.